What do Heisman winner Fernando Mendoza and Indiana's 4 legislative caucus leaders have in common? Well, all of them are card-carrying Hoosiers, homegrown or adopted, who burst into the national spotlight through their involvement in high-profile showdowns in 2025. Hi, I'm John Schwantes, and on this week's show, we'll ask those legislative leaders how their recent fight over redistricting might shape the General Assembly's 2026 session and their debates over more traditional issues such as education, public safety, and the rising costs of energy, childcare, and health care. It's Indiana Lawmakers, from the State House to your house.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, with additional support provided by Par Ritchie.
Mention the use of chairs and whips to maintain order, and you may well evoke thoughts of old-school lion tamers. The State House, of course, isn't a circus, but when it comes to that multi-ring spectacle known as the Indiana General Assembly, the animal handler imagery is not without metaphorical value. After all, the General Assembly is made up of 150 strong-willed characters, each with a distinct agenda, persona, and constituency. Without a clearly defined leadership structure, chaos would almost certainly reign. In the House of Representatives, the undisputed ringmaster is the Speaker. Every 2 years after Indiana's legislative elections, House members choose one of their own to occupy this all-important post. Besides serving as the de facto leader of the Majority Caucus, the Speaker is the presiding officer of the House, meaning they manage the chamber's formal proceedings. The Speaker also decides the makeup of legislative committees, appoints the chairs of those committees, and determines which committees will consider which bills. On the other side of the State House rotunda, the Senate doesn't have a Speaker per se, but it does have a largely equivalent leadership position, President pro tem. Technically, the Lieutenant Governor is the President or presiding officer of the Senate, but because they aren't an elected member of the chamber, the Lieutenant Governor votes only to break ties. The President pro tem presides when the Lieutenant Governor is away. Pro tem, of course, is a Latin phrase meaning for the time being. But make no mistake, in every sense that matters, the Senate's President pro tem calls the shots, assigning bills, appointing committees, and setting the chamber's overall agenda. While the majority caucuses are electing their leaders, their partisan counterparts are doing likewise. Enter the House and Senate minority leaders. Although they lack the broad administrative powers wielded by the Speaker and President pro tem, the minority leaders provide opposition to the majority party's policies. Oh yeah, let's not forget the majority and minority whips, along with their assistant whips. And generally speaking, the whips are enforcers. They pressure their caucus's members to toe the party line. The term derives from British fox hunting, where a so-called whipper-in is responsible for keeping the hounds from wandering away from the pack. See, there's just no getting around that animal handler imagery.
I am pleased to welcome to our first roundtable of the 2026 session, House Speaker Todd Huston, a Fishers Republican, House Minority Leader Phil GiaQuinta, a Fort Wayne Democrat, Senate President Pro Tem Rodric Bray, a Martinsville Republican, and Senate Minority Leader Shelli Yoder, a Bloomington Democrat. Thank you all for being here. We got to start with redistricting. I mean, you all became global sensations. I mean, everybody watched that unfold. We talk about repercussions and fallout from that. So I do want to start there. We're not going to relitigate that vote, but it was the Senate, your chamber, Rod Bray, that in fact voted it down with 21 out of 40 Republicans siding with all 10 Democrats. What is the fallout? Is there fallout? Either personal, professional, political, or from a policy standpoint for the state of Indiana?
You know, I guess the first thing I'll say is at the end of the day, this was just one other issue that we debate, right? There's lots of issues that we debate. Sometimes we come on different sides of conclusions on that, and that's kind of where this is. So will there be fallout out of Washington, D.C.? I don't really think so. We watched just recently where there was, we got $207 million for rural health care. That was a little more than we expected to get. So I think that's evidence that that's not going to be the case. So we're going to move on now as we start a new legislative session to talk about lots of other issues that are important to Hoosiers. And there'll be some differences of opinion there between the House and the Senate, even the Republican caucuses and the governor's office. That's just how policy making works. So I think we don't want to make too much of that. Now, I do think, to the question of are there some political consequences, it's going to be an issue for some people, but we expect to have primaries every May when people run. We expect to have challenges in November, and you've got to go out and make your case. And so that's exactly what my members
Just
are going
not
to do.
every primary, though, that the President of the United States from your own party and the governor from your own party say, we're going to recruit and fund people to run against these. Now, you're not up this time around, so no worry about filing deadlines, which in Indiana is for this upcoming election, February 6th. Your take on this? Will there be repercussions politically?
I couldn't agree more with my friend Senator Bray. The only change I'd say is we're just continuing the legislative session, not starting it. That'd be the only thing I would say about no, moving forward.
And you're going to support him in 2 years when he is up?
Great friend.
Great friend. You're going to support him?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
I mean, look. I mean, we've worked together on a lot of things, and I think we have a great track record in the state of Indiana. Tons of success. That's been done cooperatively, and we'll continue to do that this session.
I can't leave the Democrats out of this fight, even though you probably could sit back and sort of enjoy the spectacle that unfolded. But let's talk about the Senate. Shelli Yoder, all 10 members of your caucus, again, 21 members, Republicans. What does it mean for Indiana?
I think for
now and going forward.
Right. It was a historical thing that happened, and I think our role, the Senate Dems, started right away when we heard that the president was sending the vice president to discuss this possibility in early August. And we got to work really quickly in educating Hoosiers, letting them know what was at stake, what was really going on. And we did not give up, and we were relentless until the very end. So our work started early, and we never let our foot off the gas.
And Phil GiaQuinta, worried about repercussions long term, and not so much from a political standpoint for your party, but dollars flowing from the federal government, or the decision to put federal facilities here. There's always a contest for those sort of coveted high job and high profile types of installations.
Sure. Yeah, no, I don't worry about that at all, actually. I would say that, unfortunately, having to spend the last 4 months, almost 4 months really, of dealing with this issue, we're full-time, we have other jobs. And so when our attention gets diverted to these type of things, unfortunately, when we could be focusing, I think, on more important issues that affect Hoosiers, hated to see that. I will say this, though, it was nice to see the public engage one way or another, and to bring this issue to the forefront. I was really pretty pleased with the way the public was involved, whether they attended town halls, rallies, and those sorts of things. And then, of course, I was very happy with our own members. Did a wonderful job on the House floor, and I think maybe persuaded a few of the House Republicans to come our way, even though we weren't successful. So we'll just have to. But now, look, that's behind us, and we'll just move on to the real issues.
You didn't get as many headlines as, say, Kurt Signetti and Fernando Mendoza, but front page of the New York Times isn't anything to sneeze at. I'm going to leave this topic with one more question, though. Rod Bray, there were members of your caucus. Gene Lysing vocally said the first thing the governor needs to do with the upcoming session is apologize to you. Has he apologized, and do you want him to apologize?
I don't need an apology from the governor. We got to find ways to work together. I've sat down with him just in the last couple of days and explained that we're going to find things where we agree on. There are a number of them that we're going to work on those things and create some good stories and good outcomes for Hoosiers. So that's
so
how
you feel that is behind.
Yeah, we got more work to do.
All right, let's get to what you want to talk about, which is what you want to see happen in this short session, which one real world repercussion of this session is it's shorter because you've spent 2 weeks in December on the redistricting debate. So now you've committed to being done by the end of February. We got, mad dash 7-8 weeks here. I just want to go down the line. What do you want to see accomplished?
Yeah, sure.
We'll start
with first of all, we use that time in December wisely. I mean, our members were meeting with other folks. We were working on legislation. So
and there were bills that were heard.
Absolutely, there were bills that were heard. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
John, you've been around the legislative process. I mean, the first couple of weeks are not exactly, run straight out of the gate. So, we've taken advantage of that. We've worked and partnered with our Senate colleagues and our colleagues across the aisle to begin that work. So, and now we come back and we get to work on things, and continue to work on those things like, housing and utility rates will be, agenda items for us. And then, we want to make sure we continue to do deregulation around education and streamlining government. So those will be high priorities for us. You're going to hear more about that over the next few weeks. But we're excited. We have a lot to build on, a lot of great things to build on in Indiana. We're going to continue to do that.
And of course, I'm guessing, will be a call. We've already heard some rumbles about opening up the budget. The budget forecast was rosier, I think, than a lot of people expected.
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen. All right. Straight answer there. Look at the sad faces
not
here.
Not going to happen.
Let's just keep going around. Shelli, Yoder, what do you want to see come out of this? And I should point out, Democrats, I thought, were really coordinated in their messaging this week. You both did news conferences immediately following the Monday reopening. Every member of your caucus had news releases. Do you see this as a messaging opportunity, even though it's a very short session?
Well, it's always an opportunity to improve the lives of Hoosiers, and that's what the Senate Dems have been focused on, and we've been laser focused on issues of affordability, because that's what we've been hearing about. In addition to redistricting, it was affordability. Indiana has simply been a state that traditionally has been a great place to raise a family, but more and more families are feeling the pinch of not being able to make their bills at the end of every month. So we've focused on 4 pillars, and that would be childcare, healthcare, utilities, and housing. And our members have filed bills in each of these 4 pillars addressing issues of affordability. And I want to just say something about coming back to finding a way to be very focused and disciplined when it comes to reopening the budget. There is an important thing of being principled. We did set a budget for 2 years, but what is principle amidst suffering? And when we have heard, especially around the issues of childcare, I think we have to weigh how we can address these issues of childcare so people aren't leaving the workforce. And that is going to have ramifications for Indiana for generations to come. So I think we could come into this conversation about looking at ways that we could address childcare in a very principled, disciplined way that would address the suffering that's happening in Indiana.
We have had, more than 24 facilities closed just since the last session because of some of the fiscal constraints and the cutbacks, both in terms of the voucher and the amounts and the elimination of some folks on the waiting list. Phil GiaQuinta, you joked this week at that news conference that if you feel a sense of deja vu, you're not crazy. These are the same bills, essentially, are the same priorities you had last session. The working Hoosier agenda. Elaborate.
Exactly. I mean, I mentioned several of these things in my opening speech last year, coming off the election and what we were hearing from folks. And so things really haven't changed, haven't improved much. And so you mentioned childcare. I had the opportunity to tour a local facility up in Fort Wayne in October, and then in December, just a couple of weeks ago, I got the notice that they're going to be closing. And so I was very disappointed with that. So eliminating the wait list would be one way to do that for the child care vouchers. But there's all kinds of things that we can do with regards to these issues with housing. I mean, what I saw, the average age now is getting up to almost 40 years old before these young folks are able to afford to buy a home. There's things that we can do to create, savings accounts, these sorts of things where folks tend to be able to go get low interest loans and to be able to afford to buy their own home. So I think that we should be laser focused on the affordability issue. We were last session as well. We're going to continue to do that this session.
Well, Rod Bray, I started this sort of questioning about priorities with your Republican colleague in the House. Your turn. What do you want to see?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Let me attach on to what the Speaker said real quickly about the session. What we are going to end early, going to end before March begins, but it's not going to be a shorter session because we did 2 weeks in December. And I think it's relevant to make the point that one, our work in December wasn't a special session. It was just the start of this 2026 session. And as a result of that, there's no additional cost that it was incurred to do that. Plus, we got a lot of work done. I know the House did, the Senate as well did. When you saw us begin on Monday, January the 5th, there were a number of bills already on second reading because they had come out of committee and been fully vetted in
Which
December.
never happens, obviously.
So we made the most of the time.
It's a possibility in most years.
That's exactly right. So we made the most of the time. We feel like we've been productive. So we've hit the ground running now here in January. What you'll see us work on are a couple things. We talked maybe a little bit about Senate Bill 1, which is kind of bringing Indiana into compliance with some of the big beautiful bill provisions, but also making sure that we're executing with as much integrity and fidelity as we can some of our food stamps and Medicaid costs, because we need to make sure that that is preserved for the people that need it, and that the people that have other options are going to use those, because we need to make sure we keep that money and that program running smoothly for the people that need it, and not spending those dollars on things that could otherwise go to public education and things like that.
Are you worried, though, that, I mean, virtually everyone else here on the couch has talked about affordability in some way, shape, or form. And when you're talking about realignment or tightening down some of the requirements to align with federal policy, that might mean more work requirements for Medicaid and certain benefits, food and infant care benefits and so forth. How do you reconcile, yes, it's saving dollars, but are you not putting people in harm's way financially?
I don't think there aren't many people that are going to object with work requirements if you have the ability to do so. And if you don't have, these statutes or these laws aren't going to require you to work if you don't have any ability to. But that is a requirement that we're going to ask for. And I think it's again part of keeping the integrity and the fidelity of the programs out there. Because if you look at Medicaid, for example, when I first took office in 2012, it was 12% of the budget. In 21, it was about 16% of the budget. It is now, in the next two budgets, has grown to almost 23% of the budget. And where does that come from? Half of our dollars that Indiana spends are on education dollars. You've seen that decrease as Medicaid increases. So we've got to make sure that we keep that program for the people that need it, but that it's not going to be used for people who really don't need it but would like to have it. And from 1965, when Medicaid began, to 2021, that grew from $0 to $5 billion. From 2021 to 2025, it went from $5 billion to $10 billion. That is wildly unsustainable. So we've got to make sure that we're keeping that program in check.
Well, Indiana's Medicaid rolls did grow significantly during COVID when federal dollars came in. Now those federal dollars have been withdrawn, which I guess adds to the difficulty with sustainability.
Well, John, but I think what I think the Senate is appropriately addressing is making sure that the benefits get to those who need them, who actually qualify for them.
But so you don't see any contradiction between that and affordability for people worried about health care?
Affordability to getting making sure that people that need these benefits receive these benefits and all these benefits. I just say we are all concerned about affordability. I mean, our agenda will touch on obviously affordability. The fundamental difference of just opinion is look, well, the affordability issue was created by government. It was created by government when we threw $7 trillion into the system in 2021, and it was created by the fact on childcare that the government has put so many regulations in that we've constrained supplies. On housing, the government has put so many regulations in that we've driven up costs. So I think where there's a fundamental disagreement of opinion is where we would say is like we need to deregulate these systems to allow more housing opportunities. As Leader GiaQuinta noted, it should be very alarming to all of us that the first-time home buyer in America is 40 years old. That's where most of us began to build equity in our lives. I think the fundamental difference of opinion, and it's an appropriate difference of opinion, is whether you think government solves that by taking actions that I think have frankly caused the affordability crisis, or whether you try to do things to get the government out of the way so that we can get back on utility rates is without a doubt a product of basically saying we're going to shift the types of energy uses that are going to lead into our utility rates.
John, I'd like to comment on
let me just say, I am impressed that you agree, though, there's an affordability crisis, because your president says it's propaganda made up, fake news.
Right? I don't think you can talk to people. I mean, look, we all should have concerns about utility rates. We should all have concerns about, again, the first-time home buyer is being 40 years old.
So you acknowledge the affordability is a real...
But I think how you solve it is really the count.
All right, now I didn't mean to interrupt. Please.
My concerns, SB1 just dropped yesterday, so trying to absorb it and see what it means and having that be the priority. I think the concern here is SB1 is saying that program integrity is the same thing as cutting eligible Hoosiers off of these programs that they are, as I said, eligible for. And that is simply not the case. And so what we're doing is we are having more and more sort of fraud rhetoric. And the mechanics
Well,
of that
it's more than
fraud.
rhetoric in some
No, the
states. I mean, it's
mechanics
a
of
real
that,
issue.
But we're talking about Indiana. And the mechanics of that is going to be using cutting eligible Hoosiers off, as well as increasing churn. And those kinds of points in SB1, I think it would be beneficial for Hoosiers to read it and to look. We certainly want to make sure that there isn't fraud, but to call something fraud is only going to have a chilling effect. It's only going to cost, at the end of the day, possibly Hoosiers more money when it comes to health care and access to nutritious food. But I think that is the issue here with SB1 is saying that a program's integrity relies on cutting people off of access to care and food.
Phil GiaQuinta, this working Hoosier agenda, which you alluded to, there's some specific ideas in there, capping health insurance premiums and limiting, I forget which bill would say no more than 6% of a household income can go to utility costs, and capping this and capping that. How realistic is that? You're talking about, things that our society, not just in Indiana, has wrestled with. What kind of profit can a utility company make? Can you cap health insurance premiums just arbitrarily? I mean, sounds good, but I mean, how confident are you that that actually can ever happen?
Well, we give tax breaks all the time. It seems like lately it's been for corporation businesses, for example, data centers. They don't pay the sales tax. How about giving that same 7% sales tax break to citizens? Hoosiers. I mean, there's things that we can do, honestly, if we really want to put our focus on helping consumers. Now, look, if we don't want folks to have to rely on the government to help them, then let's make sure that we're doing everything we can by creating high-wage jobs, making sure that folks have the necessary means to get started, get off the to right footing, and so that they're productive citizens and going to make money, earn great wages, so that they don't have to rely on government. So there's a lot of things that I think we really, frankly, we're getting a little off topic, I know, on some of these things, but we tend to, we don't deal with the problem from the beginning. We tend to kind of try to solve it at the back end, and in my opinion, that's the wrong way to go about it.
And that's every legislative body in America that deals with things when they become crisis. I mean, that's probably the nature of the beast, right?
We've cut taxes for Hoosiers and state income tax every year in the last 6 years. We'll continue to do that. I mean, look, we've been totally committed to trying to make sure.
You're not suggesting you're going to open the budget and give new cuts.
No, they're already set. Right. They're already set in statute.
I thought,
continue to phase in,
and we have new tax cuts.
We've cut utility receipts tax. We've done, I think, we have been very conscientious to make sure that we're supporting keeping as much of Hoosiers' well-earned income in their own pockets. And I think that's the right public policy. I think it's why when you look at the revenue forecast you mentioned earlier, that we are a beacon in the Midwest. Like, we are outperforming everyone around us economically. And I think it's because we've set those policies in place, and I think you can go across most of the 92 counties and see really, really positive things happening. We share, again, I think, to Leader GiaQuinta, those are the exact things we all share. We want to see higher Hoosier wages. We want to see more people employed. We have the best unemployment rate when you look at both the number of people in the percentage of people that don't have jobs, but we also have the highest participation rate in the Midwest. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good things going on. We have to continue to build on those. I think the best thing that we can do is to get the heck out of the Hoosiers' way and let them be successful.
Rod Bray, on this notion of affordability and what is practical and feasible this session, I'll paraphrase Ronald Reagan. When the laws passed this session take effect, unless they're emergency on July 1st, when bills tend to take effect, will Hoosiers be able to say, am I better off now than I was before?
Yeah, absolutely they will be. And on the issue of affordability, so certainly I agree that affordability is an issue. It's something we need to be put a lot of thought into. But as the speaker referenced already, in 10 years we've cut taxes 20 times. The income tax went down on January 1st. It's going to go down again January 1st of 2027 to 2.9%, one of the couple of lowest in the nation of states that still have an income tax. And so that really matters. Plus, in 2025, we watched about $39 billion, 2024, $39 billion of a new investment come into the state of Indiana. You heard Governor Braun over the summertime announce that the jobs that were coming in 2025 were almost $40.50 an hour on average. That is far larger than the average for the state as far as wages go, and it's about 17% higher than the average wage across the country. And Indiana is a low cost of living state compared to the other states. So all those things kind of show the policies that we've been working on and are continuing to work on are trying to make things more affordable for Hoosiers and also put more money in those pockets.
I'm afraid you know what I'm going to say next. We're out of time. We could go on, but we'll just have to watch you do that very thing once the session continues between now and the end of February. Thank you very much for being here. Again, my guests have been House Speaker Todd Huston, a Fishers Republican, House Minority Leader Phil GiaQuinta, a Fort Wayne Democrat, Senate President Pro Tem Rodric Bray, a Martinsville Republican, and Senate Minority Leader Shelli Yoder, a Bloomington Democrat. Time now for our weekly conversation with Indiana Lawmakers longtime analyst Ed Feigenbaum, publisher of the newsletter Indiana Legislative Insight, part of Hannah News Service. Ed, as much as I want to talk to you about Indiana football, you even wore the socks commemorating the season. Let's talk about the session. Your reaction to the first week of 2026 session and the just completed roundtable.
I think everybody was worried about tension coming into both the December version of our session and 2026. But as you saw through the panel, you know, all four leaders are Indiana University alums. They're all on the same page on at least the football season here. And I think that they're all looking to get along well for the session. I don't think that there's going to be any kind of underlying tension for the session. I think if you look at what they're going to be doing, they're also trying to do no damage going forward here because you've got a real short turnaround to some very competitive primaries coming up in May. The filing deadline started this week and ends in about a month. And you're going to have a lot of people out there that are going to be challenged because of some of the things that happened in the December redistricting part of the session. And the leaders want to protect their members.
Does a short do no harm session, do no damage session, equate to a lackluster session in terms of policy outcome?
Well, it can. I just think that they really want to do a very kind of brief and compact agenda. One of the big things you heard a lot from the Democrats on affordability and a little bit of pushback from the Republicans on the panel on that. But I think one thing that they will agree on is doing something about utility rates. But we're not quite sure what that might take the form of. And I think that may be one of the more complicated issues when we get into the conference committee end of the session, which will be basically about 2 days worth of timing.
All right, Ed. As always, appreciate your insight.
Thank you, John.
Next week, Governor Mike Braun delivers his second State of the State address to a joint session of the General Assembly, and then he sits down with us on the next Indiana Lawmakers. Well, that concludes another edition of Indiana Lawmakers. Before we go, though, we want to acknowledge the unexpected passing last week of a beloved colleague, video editor Jerry Prince, a kind, generous, and talented professional who invariably lived up to his last name. Our thoughts are with his family.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations, with additional support provided by Par Ritchie.